This event, a conversation between Martin Schoeller and Sara Softness, the museum's curator of special projects, coincides with the opening of the museum's new exhibition, Survivors: Faces of Life After the Holocaust, a powerful photography exhibition showcasing 75 large-scale portraits of Holocaust survivors. Stripped of artifice, Schoeller's photographs portray the beauty, humanity, and resilience of those who survived and grew old in the face of antisemitism, while imagining those who were never given the chance. The portraits are accompanied by a biography of and message from each sitter, as well as video footage documenting the artist's photographic process. This is the first exhibition of the Profound series in a major U.S. museum. Martin Schoeller is one of the world's preeminent contemporary portrait photographers. He is most known for his extreme close-up portraits, a series in which familiar faces are treated with the same scrutiny as the unfamous. The stylistic consistency of this work creates a democratic platform for comparison between his subjects, challenging a viewer's existing notions of celebrity, value, and honesty. Schoeller's portraits are exhibited and collected internationally, as well as part of the permanent collection of the National Portrait Gallery, Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C. Sara Softness is an interdisciplinary curator and writer based in New York. She guest curated Boris Lurie, Nothing to Do But to Try, which is on view at the museum until November 6th. Before joining the museum as curator of special projects, he was the director of exhibitions and collections at the Walther Collection and held curatorial roles at the Brooklyn Museum, the Guggenheim, and the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale. This exhibition is co-organized by Martin Schoeller and the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. It originated by Yad Vashem on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Survivors: Faces of Life After the Holocaust is made possible by the Knapp Family Foundation, the Goldie and David Blankstein Foundation, Ben and Victoria Feder, and other generous donors. The Rita Lowenstein Gallery is dedicated by Wendy and Neil Sandler and Michael Lowenstein and Sherry Warshaw in honor of their mother, a hidden child. We are honored to have Martin and Sara with us today, and please give them a warm welcome.
All right. Welcome. Thank you, Gabriel. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Martin. Welcome to everyone tuning in on live stream. It's really my pleasure to be in conversation with you, Martin. And as Gabriel said, we're here marking the opening day of your exhibition, Survivors: Faces of Life After the Holocaust. Before we launch in, we're going to show a clip from the video, which is on view upstairs. But how are you feeling?
I feel great. Considering it's a Sunday morning, I feel very good.
Yeah, same, likewise. And yeah, like opening day, your, kind of solo show in New York. How does it feel?
Great. I'm very excited to be here. I think it's a big honor, especially considering I'm German. It's a long way. I don't know if you all had a chance to see the show yet, but I'll be upstairs later if anyone has any questions in person.
Which is great, thank you. So let's jump in and play a clip from the video, which will give you a lot of background and will allow us to kind of jump right in. So.
A picture is the fastest way to get a message and emotion into your brain.
Beautiful.
And this is why pictures are so successful when it comes to telling stories.
And sit up straight, tall, beautiful.
It's all about the power of faces. You get fascinated by such an image, and suddenly you get a story.
Born in 38, right?
39.
Oh, 39. Most of my jobs are for magazines. I'm an editorial photographer, photographing famous people, athletes, musicians, actors. So I was sitting at a bar with a friend of mine, Kai Diekmann. He said he's a chairman of Friends of Yad Vashem. We came up with this idea right then and there to photograph 75 Holocaust survivors. Next year marks 75 years of the liberation of Auschwitz.
My father died at my hands from hunger, and I remained alone.
You're not in this picture, right?
Yes, we are.
You are?
That's my sister Eva.
Oh my gosh.
And that's me. I remember seeing a woman, and she had a little child next to her. And these two guards were laughing. The next thing we saw, put his boot on the child's stomach and pulled the child apart, literally apart.
I was 9 years old. I was taken to a farm. In that farm, I met a lady called Madame Machona. I can only thank Madame Machona with all my heart. Because I could have been one of these 1,500,000 children. There is only smoke left of them. And I owe her my life.
Growing up in Germany, we grew up with this incredible sense of guilt and questioning one's identity. How come that the people from my country have been able to commit these horrendous crimes? I feel more responsible than ever to fight anti-Semitism wherever I see it. So you work at the museum pretty much every day? You come here to...
Yeah,
Every day?
every day.
Wow. You have a lot of energy.
I don't intend to lose any day of my life.
Wer macht Ihnen Ihre Frisur?
Ich habe gute Frage. Ich habe das seit 30 Jahren. Aber jetzt werden die Haare ein bisschen dünn. Bald muss ich sie alle abschneiden.
And I always say that from the ashes of Auschwitz, maybe my son, we find a solution of this terrible sickness called cancer.
So 4 kids.
I have 4 kids. 22 grandchildren.
22.
Shalom, shalom, shalom.
I do think you have a responsibility for your history. If everybody looked at their own history and tried to learn from their own history and try to use that knowledge to better themselves, to better a society, I think that's what will bring us all as humans forward.
I'm always left a little bit speechless after that video. And yet, of course, it gives us so much to talk about. I think it will ring in my ears forever to hear Berta with the blue eyeshadow say, there's only smoke left of them now, the 1.5 million children who perished. So obviously, this was an emotional series to make. Can you just tell us about meeting the survivors? And just for background, this is at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Remembrance Center, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem, in Israel, who helped coordinate Martin's meeting of all these survivors and the photographic session. So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I backtrack a little bit to how this project came about. Like I mentioned in the video, I was sitting at 2 o'clock in the morning after a lot of red wine in a bar, after an event, after an exhibition of another photographer, and I was in there with Kai Diekmann, who's a former editor-in-chief of this big yellow press newspaper called Bild Zeitung. So some people hate him, some people love him. He's a very much talked about person, but he feels very strongly about the state of Israel. He is friends with Benjamin Netanyahu. And he is a chairman of the Friends of Yad Vashem. So he basically raises money in Germany to support Yad Vashem. And I mentioned to him that I ended up marrying a woman who's Jewish, and that, you know, I still to this day think about the Holocaust a lot. You know, we learned a lot in school about it. It was an omnipresent omnipresent, the whole subject matter of the Third Reich growing up in Germany was constantly on the forefront. Yeah, so we were sitting there and we thought like, oh my God, it's going to be 75 years since the end of the Second World War, since the liberation of Auschwitz. And that's where we came up. He loves my close-up portraits. He said, why don't you photograph Holocaust survivors? And I'm like, okay, how about 75? And then Yad Vashem invited us to do it there. It took him a long time to convince them to invite a German photographer to do these very stark close-up portraits. You know, you have to imagine you're an 85-year-old woman. Do you really want to be photographed by me? It's a very revealing kind of photography. It's very honest. I don't retouch the images. But they managed to find subjects, and Kai was able to raise money to have us all travel there. I did it for free, but you know, all the equipment and the flights and the hotels and the printing, and to produce the video was quite a lot of money. So a German corporation that is now an electricity conglomerate, but they used to have mining in Germany, and they had forced labor during the Second World War. They didn't have prisoners from concentration camps, but they had forced laborers, and they're trying to make up for the company history by supporting projects that are important to them. And so they supported this exhibition, and then the show opened in Germany 2 days before the 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. And I had the honor that Angela Merkel flew in on her helicopter to open the show. Yeah, but I knew from the start, from that night there, that this would be a real emotional challenge, to get back to your question. And I tried to brace myself for those days in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem, but when they gave me this list of all the people that I had to photograph, and you would just see their birth date, the name, and then basically a list, for most of them, a list of all the concentration camps that they were in. Many of them 3, 4, 5 different concentration camps over the years. It was like, dark clouds rolled in. It was really like, oh my God. For me, all of a sudden, you know, the first day, and you see 75 names of their birthdays, and then hundreds of different concentration camps, and Auschwitz-Birkenau over and over and over again. It felt like this mountain I had to climb, and then the first survivors showed up, and you know, I didn't know really what to expect. But being at Yad Vashem and them trusting the institution so much, I kind of, you know, I always say as a photographer, it's best if you can, you know, work in an environment where everybody's already comfortable. You don't have to talk people into something. So they were all so comfortable being there. They had heard about me. They had seen my pictures beforehand. They knew that this was a personal project of mine, that I did it out of my own free will because it was important to me. So they were so nice and so sweet and so loving that, it made it possible to pull this off. But you know, there was a lot of crying to be had. And the first night when we went out, my team and I, and we had dinner, and nobody said anything. You know, what can you say after a day of listening to Holocaust survivor stories? So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of that just in glimpses comes through in the video, but I think now is a good moment to backtrack and talk about your portrait work more generally, because Martin's a big deal. I don't know if you guys know his name, but name a publication and you can swear that his photos have graced the pages. So if we could do the next slide, please. So his signature style is this extreme close-up. You can see this is a sneak preview of the installation. And here is a monograph of these pictures, close. And if you could just flip through, maybe stay 5-10 seconds on each slide, I guarantee you'll recognize the faces here. They need no introduction. But I hoped you could talk about the close-up because, obviously it's different. All your shoots must be different in so many different ways, but how did this become your signature, your calling card, and why are you drawn to this format?
Yeah, I still don't know to this day really why. I have tried to find explanations. I'm being asked this question a lot of times. When I look at pictures that I took to apply for photo school, I see that I already came in really close on people for my application, and maybe because I'm not afraid of people, I don't know what it is, but a big influence definitely were Brandt and Hiller Becher. They have a show right now at the Met. It's maybe a little surprising to hear that they're my biggest influence. They photographed a series on water towers, on grain elevators, on different kind of lifts, different pieces of industrial structures, focusing always on a different style of buildings, and then putting all these buildings or these water towers up for comparison. And it took me a long time to understand their word. Somebody had given me a book with 300 water towers, and I looked at the water towers and I thought, oh my God, those pictures are so boring. It's always the same picture of these like water towers, and then it literally took years. And it finally sank in, and I was like, oh my God, this is genius, to take yourself as a photographer back, photograph the same thing in the same light, from the same angle, with the same lens, and try to take a fairly objective picture. I mean, all photographs lie, but try to take a picture that doesn't have much of an expression or a vantage point, or where the lighting is important, something kind of flat lighting, and then put up all these peoples for comparison. I kind of translated their water tower approach to portraiture. And after I worked with Annie Leibovitz as an assistant for 3 years, and then after I left Annie, I started to photograph all of my friends in this very stark, straight-on style. And it took a long time for photo editors to appreciate my work, because it was a time of Annie Leibovitz, David LaChapelle. Everybody had big setups and glamorous clothes, most beautiful locations, most beautiful lighting. And I didn't quite fit in with these like really simple portraits. But then one photo editor saw the genius in them, or what she thought genius in them, and gave me a job to photograph Vanessa Redgrave. And then people realized it was a perfect counterbalance to everything else that was happening at the time. How many times do you want to see the most beautiful woman in the most beautiful dress in an amazing location? So it was really nice for magazines to mix it up. It was like an element of surprise to have one of my close-up pictures. And I went from photographing weddings and some still life for some graphic design friends of mine in 1998 to doing 127 jobs in 1999. So it was an avalanche all of a sudden. I couldn't, it was quite overwhelming. It's not that many jobs anymore, luckily. I wouldn't be here. But yeah, and then, as time progressed, then whenever I had a little bit of a breathing moment, I came up with personal projects that are meaningful to me to do on the side, besides all these magazine and advertising assignments.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you talk about the Bechers who, created this typology and this kind of seriality, and of course there's, despite the differences of the people you're photographing, movie stars versus 90-year-old Israelis, there is a certain consistency across the style, of course. And so I have a couple of questions. One is, how was it different photographing the survivors versus celebrities, who I imagine have camera in their faces all the time? And are very used to being like in images. Was there some trepidation on the part of the survivors in front of your camera?
Yeah, it's a very different experience. If you work with famous people, you have a limited amount of time. They oftentimes have multiple photo shoots in one day. They have to be there because they signed a contract with a record label or with a movie studio to do a certain amount of promotion to sell a product. So it's a pure business transaction. And my goal was always, I don't have any famous friends. My goal was always, I want to take a picture that feels right to me, an honest picture to some extent. And that oftentimes doesn't go along with that the people I photograph necessarily like my photographs. A lot of women in Hollywood have specifically said to magazine editors they don't want to work with me, they don't want to have one of these close-up pictures taken. And then there's some people that are very famous and they're very nice and personable and you have a good time, and others are a little bit cranky and can't wait to leave. So photographing Holocaust survivors, the opposite. It's they come there, they have, some of them didn't want to leave. They told me their life story, and I had to photograph about 10 survivors a day. And then you have somebody who's talking for 2 hours, and then others are waiting. So it was more the problem of how do you find an end, and you don't want to interrupt anyone. You don't want to kick them out.
Yeah.
It was.
But you've talked about too that there's real vulnerability being in front of your camera.
And then actors, they're constantly they study their facial expressions. They spend too much time in front of mirrors, and they know how to very subtly manipulate the camera, and it's oftentimes you think you're taking a great photograph that reveals in kind of an unguarded moment, and then you look at the contact sheets later, still photograph on film, and then you look at the contact sheets later and you feel everything was just a farce. Everything was just, studied muscle contraptions. And then with people that are never being photographed or rarely photographed, it's much easier to take an honest feeling portrait.
If we could find on the slideshow some of the individual portraits of the survivors.
And then obviously old people photograph great. All the wrinkles, they make you feel like you see a whole life story in somebody's face. So
absolutely. Survivors obviously are so much at the heart of the mission of the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And we think of that not only to honor them, really honor their experiences, their grief, their resilience, also obviously to learn from them, through their voices, their testimony. This is how we ensure we're never forgetting what they went through. And we actually have hanging the museum on the second floor. At the end of our core exhibition, we have a quote from Elie Wiesel, who said, "When you listen to a witness, you become a witness." And I think in this case, with your show, when you witness a witness, perhaps you become one too. And so that makes me think about this. You spoke about your feeling of responsibility in making these pictures and getting to show them in a place like our museum. I hope you could talk about that more, and this kind of, I guess you've described it as a crushing weight of growing up in Germany when you did.
Yeah, overall, the older you get, and the more horrific stories you hear about, you come to realize how fragile our democracy is, societies are, and how the Holocaust happened in other forms before and since. Genocide has taken place ever since then in Rwanda and many other places, and I think we all can learn from these Holocaust survivors that we have to be on guard and be aware that these things have happened and will happen, and to do our best to try to avoid them, to not downplay threats to our democracy and our life together here.
Did any of the survivors feel a way that you were German?
I was worried about that, and I thought there would be an issue, but so many of them have given talks in Germany. There was one woman, she asked me if I'm German, and I said, where I'm from, I said, I'm German, and she literally jumped back and was shocked. But they also told I was German beforehand, they were shown my pictures and my biography and so forth. So.
And there were many who had come from Germany before the war.
Yeah, and I was very surprised that so many of them spoke German, even so they had been living outside of Germany. Many of them never lived in Germany. They were from Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, And before the war, Germany was a country in Europe that most Jews wanted to live in. You know, that was something I didn't know before, and that was really another very sad element to the story, that you know, it was kind of the country that Jews could be professors and scientists and politicians, didn't have to live in shtetls, didn't have to live outside of the big cities. They could actually study and become somebody. So that then, especially Germany was a country that betrayed them on this massive scale. It was, that's why they were all in hopes of at some point migrating to Germany. That's why the kids learn German.
Absolutely, no, and there's, you know, so much been written about this kind of, like, how would you have known when to leave? You couldn't imagine that there would be a betrayal at this scale. I think we feel that here too, like when, at what point does it get so bad that you have to uproot your entire life? And, you know, this leads us really right into the stories. I don't know if you guys can see on the screen the short little bios and statements from each of the survivors. So this portrait, is one of my favorites, but also because of the quote. He says, "I want the next generation to remember what we endured. I was a Jewish child who was born into a beautiful world of culture and art, one of many such children born into thriving Jewish communities across Europe. Those communities were completely destroyed, and 6 million Jews were persecuted and murdered." I think it's really important to remember these were such vibrant centers of Jewish life that these survivors experienced as children and as teenagers far too briefly, and that, you know, we're mourning the people we lost, and we're mourning too all the many cultures. And I think it's so, it's wonderful in your series that these survivors originally hail from what is now 23 different countries in Europe and North Africa. So there really is this kind of breadth of, the breadth of the Nazi regime, the countless ways that people survived. Here's another example. Eliezer was part of the Jewish resistance. There were hidden children. There were civilians who took in Jewish children who could pass for Catholic. Obviously, so many camp survivors. If we could go through the next slide. So a lot of the slides I chose here just for the talk, you kind of get a glimpse of the people in the video. Can you tell us about some of the more memorable sitters?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest shock was probably Martha Wiese when she, you know, said she was in Auschwitz-Birkenau the day it was liberated, and there was only a few hundred children at that time, from what I've known. And there's this famous picture a Russian soldier took of children at the barbed wire fence. And I just happened to have that newspaper article with me that had that picture in it, so I pulled it out and showed it to Martha. I said, "Martha, you were there. You're not in this picture, are you?" And she's like, "No, that's me and that's my sister." And it was like, you know, I've seen that picture as a child growing up in Germany. It's in every school book. It's like one of the most famous pictures from that time, and that's really when history comes to life, something that has happened so long ago. All of a sudden entering the room, that was very moving. And she told me that the Russians, I knew it wasn't a big, there was no big fights in front of Auschwitz-Birkenau. The Germans had left. There was 2 Russian soldiers on the 27th of January in 1945. They were pulling a sled with a machine gun on it through the snow. There was some fighting close by a couple of days before, and they walked through the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau. They had no idea what they had found. And they walk into this camp full of the last remaining prisoners, and they didn't have any camera with them. And the Russian soldiers weren't allowed to have cameras. Stalin didn't want them to tell the story of the war being told through amateurs or to people he couldn't control, so soldiers were not allowed to carry cameras. So the Russians had to realize later what they have stumbled across, and staged the liberation. They basically put on a movie production of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. So they brought in all these good-looking soldiers, all the flags, camera crews, and Marta remembers it was like 6 weeks and the prisoners hadn't left yet because there was no place to go. The war was still going on. So Marta said she had to put the prison clothes back on, and she says, you can see our hair is long and we're not, we already look pretty well fed again. It was 6 weeks after we were liberated that this picture was taken. So, fake news is, is quite old.
Absolutely. I think that's a good kind of transition into talking about pictures and the Holocaust. Obviously, we all know there's indelible images, and you're mentioning one, the one that Marta and her sister are in, photographs of the camps, of emaciated prisoners and ghettos, and even some images of mass shootings. And these were invaluable evidence in the post-war period. There's really no overstating the importance of photography and the education around the Holocaust, the designation of crimes against humanity, Nazi war tribunals, all of it. And it's really interesting. It's still a matter of debate today here in the museum, something we talk about a lot. Should we show atrocity photos? They were taken most often by Nazi officers, which is really this photographic record of such a coercive power dynamic, captor and prisoner. And obviously, your relationship to these perhaps often same people, as you're saying with Marta, is so different. And I think, I'm so grateful for artists and thinkers and writers and everyone who kind of finds new creative ways to address and engage Holocaust history through imagery. And I think here the survivors are so present. The photographs are so life-affirming in so many ways. What do you see in their faces? Can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, I really, it's always hard to say, people ask me, what do you see in my portraits? And I think it's really left up to the person looking at them, and people see different things, and people see different things on different days. That, like you said, I was very impressed by the fact that these people had such a long life after experiencing all these horrors, and that they were able to forgive to some extent, maybe not fully forgive, but to not let the experiences ruin them, or to fall into depressions or anger, or being eaten up by bitterness, and to be able to overcome that and to start out fresh and new. I think that's a very special person. I think not everybody's capable of that. And from what I heard, many of the people that survived the Holocaust were not able to cope with their experience in history. I met a rabbi in Germany who said he worked in a mental institution that was full of Holocaust survivors that were never able to enter society again.
Absolutely, and there's something, it's such a cliche in so many ways, but a picture speaks 1,000 words. It's like, I've never thought about that so much as in the context of your work, because there is just so much etched into the faces that, both we're allowed to bring to it, and we get some information, but it's kind of amazing just to, imagine the resilience, get to see the longevity, especially because the presence of these 75 really, to me, so much suggests the people who did not and never got the chance to grow old. Seeing these faces, so many at once, is really at the same time, it's like so affirming of life and also so heartbreaking at the same time. That's how I see them. But can you go to the next slide, please? Am I right to assume the survivors, did they kind of come as they were? Was there specific instructions to dress a certain way or make up in a certain, or were they, because they're so idiosyncratic. I love them. I love that about them too.
No, I mean they all knew they were going to be photographed. They knew the style of photography, and I learned that Israeli men really love the color blue as for shirts. And I think a lot of women they went to the hairdresser the day before, and a lot of times the grandkids would come with them and said, "Oh, I just did my grandmother's makeup this morning." It was oftentimes like a family affair where the whole family came and everybody made sure that grandpa looked the best that day. It was very cute.
It's amazing. So I just want to call out too the, which I did already, but the personal statements. I think you had mentioned that the survivors kind of on the whole really feel like they portray this kind of, they're not vengeful, right? It's not about, anger that remains with them necessarily. I'd say in a really abiding way. When you read these personal statements, there's so much about the need for love and kindness, the need for empathy. They're often about the importance of the state of Israel, about family, about love. If you could go to the next slide. I know most of your portraits go unaccompanied, right, by words, by captions. How did you feel about this addition of having their statements next to the portraits?
I've been doing that more recently, and I wouldn't want to ask celebrities about the movies, but if you deal with people that have something interesting to say, I think it's just an added value. It's a bonus to get them to voice their opinion besides seeing their faces. And it was always like, obvious for me from the beginning that I would want to have some kind of a conversation with them, a little bit of a dialogue. Yeah.
Well, I invite you all to spend time with, these stories upstairs. It's kind of amazing how the series really is obviously a collective, but also you can zoom in on the individual as well. And, there are some statements that really stick with me. This is one of them, actually. At the end, she says, "I do not know why I survived and they didn't." And that's, such kind of something you hear about with survivors a lot is survivor guilt and this kind of bewilderment, but, not just a kind of, gratitude to be alive, but that doesn't really make any sense. And that comes up in the video too. It's just, this was lucky. I was lucky. Can we go a few slides forward to the picture of the installation? I want to talk about our installation a little bit. And again, we will go upstairs after this if you're interested. So we have all 75 of these pictures and portraits are displayed in the round. The building in which this gallery is a hexagon, so it's a 6-sided building. That is meant to kind of hearken to the 6 million lost in the Holocaust. Also, it's 6-tiered on the outside and 6-sided as well as the 6 points on the Jewish star. And in our installation, we have 75 pictures cover 5 of these walls. So I wanted to ask how you feel about this presentation. It's new. It was very specific for us. You talk about the process a little bit of making these prints exactly this size, and and how you feel about the way it turned out.
Yeah, I love seeing it like that. You feel it's I like to have exhibitions that feel really impactful, that I think move you emotionally, and standing in the middle of the room and having all these people stare at you in the center, I think it is kind of intimidating, which is good if photographs can have an effect that emotionally touches you, or I hope it touches people. I measured the walls and did many different printouts and many different tests to figure out the perfect size for the photographs. I want to have them as large as possible without them becoming just a mash of color. So when you look at them, you still actually look at each individual image. If they would have been any bigger, they would have almost been like posters blending into each other. So I wanted them to stand on their own, but while still accomplishing the biggest possible size. You know, if they're small, they're not as impactful. They're not as kind of aggressive in a way. You know, I think the bigger a photograph, the more it really confronts you. And then we had the problem with the text, you know, where to put the text. So we decided we put the text in the middle and not on the right and the left, like you normally would traditionally see. But that would have meant the pictures would have had to be a lot smaller. So putting the text in the middle allowed us to have the pictures the size they are. Yeah, and then the lighting was very tricky, you know, because the pictures on the bottom are further away from the light. So it was a lot of work, but it came out great, I think.
It really did. It really did pay off. I mean, when you first enter this space, it's sort of like, how are we going to install in here? I mean, obviously there was kind of only one way to do it, but then you think there's infinite possibilities, and we did play with so many of them. And I think like the way it is now has really a high drama to it, which is very affecting with an A, and effective. And as you said, it is a little bit confrontational, and this isn't in a bad way. It's just sort of, it's almost beseeching or something. You have so many eyes on you, and it's so speaks for itself. There's no way to deny these people. There's no way to deny their lives. It's really interesting how it works both emotionally and as evidence of survivors' lives. I think that's something that's really strong about the work, and also our installation is you can't escape understanding the collective. I just want to finish thinking about your process a little bit, because I've always been very curious. I mean, like, how close up do you get to people, and how do you disarm people? I mean, I imagine there's got to be some nerves, and your final frames always seem to have such peace in the faces somehow. Yeah, how do you do that?
I'm actually not that close. It's a fairly long lens. You know, I don't like wide lenses because they distort faces, and the noses get big and the ears get tiny. So it's a fairly long lens that I think, you know, it's the same kind of, it's close to how our eye perceives our surroundings. So it's pretty close to how we normally would see a person if you just looked at them. And so I'm not that close. I'm probably like as far away from as a water bottle is. So I'm not into people's faces to say.
That's still pretty close.
It's pretty close, yeah. And the lights are very bright, and
Right.
often the people that I'm photographing can barely see me because I'm behind the lights, so they hear this voice. So I have to overcome all these uncomfortable elements by like talking nonstop, playing music, trying to distract people. It's almost more like a conversation when I photograph somebody than just saying like, sit there and I take your picture. I'm constantly engaging them. And then, you know, I'm trying to make people laugh, and then capture these moments in between when they're just listening to me talk or ask the next question, or they just said something. And I like to say when the face hasn't caught up to their thoughts is like kind of the best moments, you know, when you're not trying to say something with your facial expression, when you're like really kind of still. But if you ask people just to look serious, then most people look kind of sad. So that's not a great expression either. So you don't want to just be like, hey, you look serious, and then everybody, like the face just drops. Yeah, so that's the hardest part to capture these moments, and then to have them in focus is another challenge, especially the older you get.
Right. All right. Well, I think we're coming up on closing. We have time for a Q&A. I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for this project. You know, we're the first major U.S. museum to show the project. As Martin said, it was shown in Germany last year. And, you know, because Martin made the photographs in 2019, you know, 2020 was the 75th anniversary. or I should say marked 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. So 6 of the survivors have passed away in that time. So we remember them. It's Yitzhak Arad, Rita Goldenberg Gordon, Yaakov Hendele, Sara Leicht, Emily Roy, and Baruch Shuv. You know, it almost doesn't need to be said that survivors are very precious right now. We are kind of losing our firsthand witnesses as time goes on, which is another reason this project is just so important. Any closing thoughts before the Q&A?
No, I'm curious to hear
Yeah.
your questions.
Yeah, so we'll take some questions now if you have them. I think a microphone will appear before you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sara and Martin. If we could just give them a round of applause. Thank you for being here. So I'll come around now, and we should have time for about 5 or so questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it's great. I'm very curious about one question. I read in a history book that Germany agreed to pay reparations for the horror. And I'm curious if it's true, what the context and scope of that is.
Sorry, the context of?
The context of a reparation payment to the whole Holocaust horror and the scope of it, if it's even true.
Oh, no, it's true. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
true.
Oh, yeah. Germany, the German government has been paying, and still to this day is paying reparations. I think they've mostly to the state of Israel. I mean, we're talking billions and billions of dollars over the years, over the decades. Yeah, and I think it's a good thing. You know, I mean, at least it's a little something.
Yeah, and there's also, I know this museum benefits a lot from, you know, grants made by the German government as well. They're very, I think, you know, Martin grew up learning and learning and learning about the Holocaust and reckoning with the history. And so Germany's pretty good at, you know, recognizing the part that it played and kind of taking accountability for it. Not perfect, nobody's perfect, but yeah.
Thank you. I wonder what you know, Martin, about the reactions to the photographs of the people who sat for you, and if that's in your mind when you're doing the photographs, whether they'll feel right about them, that you captured something true and honest and essential about them, and if in fact you've heard from any of them.
The best thing is that most of the time never hear from people if they like their pictures, because that would be depressing to over and over hear again. Oh my God, it don't look so good. I don't know what you did. So you know, I know from a few of them that they really like their picture, but I bet a lot of them didn't like their picture, but Yad Vashem would not tell me. And in the end, you know, we're all more vain than we like to admit, and you know, people that say they're not vain until they see a picture of themselves. So, you know, we all get older, and, you know, most people when they get older are not as attractive anymore when they were 20. But, you know, luckily that didn't come into play by putting this show together. And yeah, and some of them I heard they really liked their picture, which, you know, but I never think about it. I think it would change the way I would work, the way I would approach people. I think as a portrait photographer, you shouldn't be too concerned about your subject's vanity. I think it would just make you become, you know, you'd be a wedding photographer, you would over-retouch everything. You'd be a fashion photographer, you know. So, right, I see myself more like just as much as a documentarian of our time, and if you want to build documents, you know, you can't be worried about people looking chubby or the haircut not looking right, or, you know, so.
We came a little late, so I apologize if you already touched on it, but did you tell these people to specifically, not smile, or what to think about, what not to think about? And again, I apologize if this is something you already discussed.
Yeah, I think all photographs lie to some extent. I don't think you can reduce a person to a split second and think, I don't see myself as a soul catcher. I don't like that term. Oh, you really capture the person's soul. I think we're all so multifaceted that we cannot be summed up in one expression. But within that realm of photography, I think there's some photographs that maybe capture a little bit more about a person than others, and I hope to be on the end of the spectrum that where photographs feel a little bit more honest or a little bit less composed or staged, rehearsed. And in order to get those images, I don't tell people don't smile. I think smiles are great, and they can be just as honest of a picture with a smile, but then some people have great smiles, other people don't have such nice smiles, and the expression becomes a big part of why did you pick that picture of that person and that picture of that person. So I like to bring them all on the level platform, all the people that sit for me, and find these moments that we all share when nobody's looking at us. When I feel like if you capture a person in a moment that feels like they weren't performing for somebody else, they weren't doing a rehearsed facial expression, then maybe we get a little bit closer to what that person is about.
So it's a dilemma, no? Because it's a dilemma, no? Because if you take 12 pictures of Obama and you're a big Obama fan, you have to pick which one the world is going to see. Are you maybe in the back of your mind thinking, well, that's a nicer picture? It's a dilemma, no?
It's not a dilemma. That's where, I think it is a dilemma, yes, sometimes. When I went to the pictures of Donald Rumsfeld, I did not necessarily look for the picture where I think he looks the most sympathetic. And even so, it's like very subtle, I don't go for like the obvious lighting people from underneath and making them like with cheap tricks look evil or bad. But still, yeah, there is some, I take a stance, nothing is ever objective, and a lot of the point of view you're trying to get across as a photographer is in the editing and is in those tiny little minute differences, but that's why they're my pictures. They showcase my opinion.
Artistic privilege, yeah.
So it's a dilemma and a privilege.
Thank you very much for sharing your words and great interview. Did any of the survivors that you met have any interesting reunions with people that they knew from that period that just happened to kind of come together from your project?
All these survivors that came to be photographed by me at Yad Vashem, they're like somehow involved with Yad Vashem. They've given talks, they've given testimony. Most of them have sat down with some staff from Yad Vashem and told their story to be recorded and for the archives. But I can't remember that any of them met each other for the first time. What I learned is they came from so many different places, from all over Europe, from tiny little villages in Greece to, Spain, France. I mean, it was such a, no, not that I can remember that anyone met there.
I just want to say thank you first. I walked in the gallery before this, and it's really powerful. So I really hope everyone goes upstairs. I kind of have two questions, but one, I'm curious, were the statements, the personal statements, was that part of your conversation with them, or were those taken by someone else later? And then more about the photographs, I'm just curious, they were so clearly curated for this purpose, and I think that's one of the things that makes it so powerful, the images you chose. But in the video, you can see that there's much more emotion that's shown, and sometimes I could tell you were still taking pictures when someone was talking and laughing or smiling. And those outtakes must be a real treasure, and I'm curious if you do anything with those, if those speak to you on a different level, or if you ever share them with your subjects.
Well, that's a lot of questions. I hope I remember them all. First, thank you that you like the show so much. But yeah, no, I photograph about, with these survivors, the older people get, the less patience I have. And just for some of them, it was even hard to sit up straight. They tried to get out of wheelchairs. They had to get help to sit in a stool. They had horrible body posture, like being hunched over. And then I had to work with them, to even have them to sit up straight and have a long neck. Some of them I didn't succeed, so that's why they're also sometimes a bit crooked. Or even to open their eyes, we're talking about many people in their 90s. And no, I always narrowed it down with these close-up series to one picture that I feel like this is the best picture for that person, and never use any of the others. If I was Richard Avedon, I would destroy all the others. I don't do that. I'm not that extreme, but what was the other question? Sorry.
The statement.
The statements, yeah. So Yad Vashem luckily dealt with all of the text, because that's a big undertaking to fact-check everybody's biography. Again, these people are old. Some of them don't remember everything 100%. And the biggest issue is that if you make a mistake about something, or let's say somebody said this S&S officer by the name so-and-so in that camp, and it would turn out they got the name wrong, maybe the officer worked at a different camp, then the Holocaust deniers would jump up and say, you see, even the people that were there don't remember. This whole thing is a lie. So it's very, very, very important to get everything, to get all the facts 100% right with the subject matter. Therefore, I was really grateful that they took on the task to do that. Calling the grandchildren and looking back in books and listening to the statements that they gave maybe 30 years ago, cross-referencing previous statements. And then we asked everybody, we thought we should ask everybody the same questions. What is your message, as a Holocaust survivor, what is your message for future generations? And that's that's how we collected these quotes. And yes, there's a lot of, I keep on talking and I keep on taking, you see it in the video, I keep on talking while I'm photographing. That's kind of the hardest part, to sound halfway eloquent while you're taking pictures and focusing. But I think that's the most important part of being a photographer, a portrait photographer, to engage people in a conversation.
And I just love that we have the video, because it is kind of, a chance to see not the literal frames or outtakes, but just some indication of how they were all made, and really just the deep, deep humanity of the exchange between you all and the people themselves. So yeah, it is, not every show would have that. We're really grateful.
Okay.
Yeah, and Yad Vashem had said, I should interview 5 people. I would have loved to interview more people, but Yad Vashem was clear that they only wanted me to really interview 5 people, and we allocated more time with them and visiting them at home and so forth and so on for this video. But so many of the survivors showed up and they started talking. They felt like this is the last opportunity to tell my story. I got the sense of urgency coming from many of them. And then Yad Vashem, like I said, they were very concerned that, they knew everything was being recorded, that somebody could say something a little bit wrong and that could haunt them later on. So they were a little bit uncomfortable, but then they started all talking German. So then the staff at Yad Vashem didn't understand them anymore. So the whole situation quickly got out of control. And But, you know, and they didn't know me. They didn't quite know about my personality and how I would deal with these survivors. And, you know, they quickly realized that, you know, I was 100% on board. I was not going to use any of the footage without their permission. You know, it's like all these things that come into play into it. But
Okay, well, we're at time, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you again, Martin and Sara. The exhibition is on view, so we do hope you'll have a chance to go see it either today. For those with us on the live stream, we hope you'll come down to see Martin's exhibition, and also on view The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do, in addition to Boris Lurie, Nothing to Do But to Try. Again, that'll be with us through November 6th, and I know Martin's exhibition will be with us through June. And I believe that there will be some books for sale as well, so hope you can take advantage of that too. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you at the museum soon.